June 4th, 1942, 5:30 a.m. The Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. Above the endless horizon of the Pacific, the heat of the morning sun ripples across the surface of the sea, casting a blinding light on the swirling blue water below. The wind hums in the wings of Japanese Zeros, their engines roaring with the smooth mechanical efficiency of war machines. The men in the cockpit expertly train their faces steely with calm focus on the task ahead. The great Battle of Midway looms, but at this moment all seems certain. There is no question of victory. Captain Mitsuo. Fuchida's voice crackles through the radio, a familiar, calm tone as he leads the charge from the aircraft carrier Akagi, one of the 4 jewels of Japan's might. Fuchida, an experienced dive bomber pilot, had led the attack on Pearl Harbor less than 6 months ago. He knew how to strike with precision to cripple enemies with deadly efficiency. To him and his men, dive bombing was a proven art, a reliable method of destruction. Their systems, refined by months of brutal training, had worked before, and it would work again. But for the first time in his career, Fuchida's confidence seemed to extend not just to the aircraft, but to the air around him, an invincible belief in Japan's superiority in its technology and in its strategy. "The Americans are no match for us," Fuchida thought as he adjusted the throttle on his Aichi D-3A1 dive bomber. His orders were clear: strike the heart of the American fleet, cripple the carriers, and secure victory. His men, too, were unwavering in their confidence. They had trained on precision dive bombing, perfecting the technique to deliver deadly blows from above. It was a near-perfect system. The American fleet, scattered and unaware of the approaching storm, would never know what hit them. But as Fuchida's eyes scanned the horizon, his mind danced with images of success, the smooth trajectory of his bomb, the explosion on the enemy deck, the panic and chaos that would erupt as the aircraft carriers burned. The path ahead seemed simple, clear, and most of all assured. Yet as the wind sang through the engines, as the sun climbed higher, there was a slight discomfort in the back of Fuchida's mind, a fleeting thought that whispered something faint, something unwelcome. It was not yet a doubt. It was not yet a warning. It was the faintest sense of an unsettled calm, like the stillness before a storm. But the certainty of Japanese power, of military brilliance, drowned it out. In the war room aboard the Akagi, Admiral Chuichi Nagumo sat calm and collected. He had overseen the planning for this operation for months. His men had executed flawless strikes in the past, and he had no reason to expect anything less now. He knew the Americans had been scrambling to prepare, but they were still years behind in terms of technological advancements. The Americans had only recently formed the Pacific Fleet. Their aircraft and equipment were outdated, easily outclassed by the Japanese machines, their strategies naive in comparison to Japan's brutal pragmatism. This would be no different from Pearl Harbor, a swift decimating strike followed by victory. Nagumo's fingers danced over the maps on the table, tracing the paths of the incoming planes. His eyes were calm, betraying no concern. His orders had been executed precisely. The enemy would soon learn their lesson. But even as Nagumo spoke with confidence, a few scattered pieces of information were filtering through his command network messages that would soon prove to be critical. American intelligence, however flawed it may have been, had pinpointed the location of Japan's fleet. Midway would not be a surprise. None of these reports changed the certainty in Nagumo's voice. To him, victory was as certain as the rising sun. And yet a slight unease was creeping in, like a low, distant rumble beneath the thunder. It went unnoticed, drowned out by the fierce conviction of those in command. Victory, after all, was inevitable. Back in the cockpits, the pilots of the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu were already approaching their target area. Their bombs hung heavily beneath their wings, silent harbingers of destruction. The planes flew in precise formations, each part of a deadly ballet that had been rehearsed to perfection. They would soon engage the American fleet, which they believed was somewhere on the horizon. But even at this early hour, there was something different in the air, a faint chill of unease that for now seemed trivial. The engines hummed with power. The bombers soared through the sky, certain of their path. The sound of radio chatter crackled in the background voices of command, issuing simple orders. In the distance, the silhouette of the American fleet began to materialize, unaware of the approaching storm. In this moment, the Japanese pilots were invincible. At least they thought so. There was no hint of the catastrophe to come. June 4th, 1942. 6 a.m., the Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The wind shifts as the Akagi and its fleet of aircraft draw closer to Midway Atoll. The sun now rises higher, revealing a sweeping ocean of blue. To the east, the vast expanse of water is punctuated only by the occasional whitecaps and the distant mists of the atoll. The Japanese pilots remain confident, locked in their formations as they prepare for the strike that will cripple the American Pacific Fleet. But far below on Midway Atoll, the situation is changing. The island's American defenders have already spotted the Japanese fleet. They are awake, preparing alert, unlike the Japanese who still believe themselves undetected. Their radar has picked up strange signals. Fighters begin to take to the skies and squadrons of bombers are readied. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, head of the U.S. Navy's cryptanalysis efforts at Pearl Harbor, watches the incoming reports flicker on his map. A wrinkle forms across his brow. There's something odd in the signals they've intercepted, something that hints at Japanese activity. The hours of intercepted Japanese communications decoded and analyzed by his team have shown the first signs of what Rochefort suspects an attack. But there are holes, gaps in the data that lead to confusion. Was it the fleet? Was it an attack on Midway? Could it be a diversion? The Japanese had after all done this before. The warning is not entirely clear. But Rochefort doesn't ignore it. The signs are there, but the question is whether they are enough. He scrambles to refine the data, pushing the team to work faster. His mind works in overdrive, trying to piece together what could be a small window into Japan's movements. By the time he finishes briefing the command staff, a message from Commander Dudley Knox reaches his desk. Knox has received word from the reconnaissance planes they are detecting Japanese ships in the area. The fleet is closing in on Midway. At this very moment, Admiral Nagumo, aboard the Akagi, watches his planes approach their target. He is unaware of the signs unfolding at Midway. The mission remains crystal clear: annihilate the American fleet. Any report suggesting otherwise would be of little consequence at this point. The mission, after all, has been long in the making. Success has been practically guaranteed by months of meticulous planning. Why doubt it now? In the meantime, across the Pacific, American forces have already mobilized. The aircraft carriers, Enterprise Hornet and Yorktown, are positioned near Midway. From these ships, the first planes take off, heading straight toward the heart of the battle. Their purpose is clear: intercept and delay the Japanese onslaught long enough for Midway's defenses to rally and prepare. But the question remains, will it be enough? The tension between certainty and doubt grows as these planes climb into the sky. There is no concrete proof yet that Japan's fleet is preparing for attack, but the mounting intelligence cannot be dismissed. Midway has already been put on high alert. As the Japanese dive bombers continue their course, they are unknowingly heading straight toward a force of Americans who are already preparing for the worst. But there's no sign yet that the Japanese will take notice of their opponent's readiness. To them, this is just another battle, a straightforward strike against an inferior fleet, back in the command center aboard the Akagi. Nagumo continues to plan. His fleet's progress is reported by a steady stream of radio messages, all underscored by the same relentless belief in the Japanese superiority. The American fleet will be caught unaware, and the attack will be a swift success. And yet, despite his confidence, something is nagging at the back of his mind. A strange report reaches him, one that mentions American aircraft heading toward his fleet, but it is dismissed. It must be a false alarm. He dismisses the thought as quickly as it arrives. The fleet is still out of sight. Meanwhile, over Midway, the American pilots are still gathering themselves. The first squadron of Dauntless dive bombers lifts off from the Yorktown, the roar of their engines mixing with the rush of the wind. There's no time for hesitation. Orders have been given. The Japanese are on their way, and the battle is soon to begin. The American pilots are not entirely unaware of what they face. They know the Japanese dive bombers are deadly accurate, some of the best trained pilots in the world. But they also know that they must engage now before it's too late. Every minute they delay allows the Japanese to gain ground. They cannot afford to wait for perfect certainty. They must act even if it means rushing into the unknown. As the bombers reach their altitude, the American radar stations are buzzing. The reports begin to come in. There's more than one Japanese fleet. The Japanese are close, but for now, the early warning signs are being ignored. Midway's defenders brace for an attack, unaware that the Japanese are still believing they have the upper hand. The early misjudgments, the signals that were ignored, are beginning to compound. No one knows it yet, but the seeds of disaster have been sown. Back in the sky, the Japanese bombers keep their formation unfazed. Their course is true. In their minds, victory is still assured. June 4th, 1942. 6:30 a.m. The Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The sky above the Pacific is clear. A deep expanse of blue unmarred by clouds as the Akagi and its sister ships push forward their bombers, slicing through the air with deadly precision. On the bridge of the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo checks the radio once more. His heart beats steadily, the nerves of battle steadying in his chest. He runs his fingers over the map, tracking the progress of the incoming bombers as they close in on their target, the American fleet, on the Enterprise and Hornet. American pilots prepare for what they know will be a desperate last-minute engagement. Their planes loaded with bombs climb into the sky. The pilots' faces are focused, but beneath that, there's an undercurrent of urgency, of unspoken worry. They had known the battle was coming, but now that it's here, the true weight of the moment has settled in. As the Akagi's bombers get closer to Midway, something shifts in the air, something neither side can see coming. The first Japanese contact with the American defenders is sudden, shocking. Out of nowhere, American fighters roar into the sky, cutting across the formation of the Japanese bombers, their engines screeching as they dive to attack. The Japanese pilots are startled at first, their instinctual training kicking in as they twist and roll to evade. The Dauntless dive bombers are on them, graceful, deadly, and fast. For a moment, time seems to stretch, every detail frozen. The Japanese pilots, usually the hunters, are now forced into the unfamiliar role of the hunted. Their confidence shatters just a little as the reality of the situation sinks in. The Americans are not caught off guard. The reports from the radar stations were correct. The Enterprise and Hornet have deployed their aircraft and the battle is already unfolding. The first Zero is shot down, spinning wildly into the ocean. Then another and another. The air above the sea is alive with traces and explosions as the Japanese bombers and American fighters clash. But this is only the beginning. The true shock is about to arrive. On the Akagi, Nagumo receives the first troubling report. His bombers are engaged in combat with enemy fighters, but they are not yet defeated. It is merely a disruption, nothing serious, nothing that will change the course of the attack, but something feels different. His pilots were trained to handle this, to push through the opposition and complete their mission, and yet this is the first sign of an unpredictable variable, a fight in the air, not a smooth, unchallenged strike. Meanwhile, the American Dauntless dive bombers are climbing to their attack positions. The timing is critical. The American pilots are calculating their paths, aiming for the heart of the Japanese fleet. They know what's at stake. Their mission is simple: take out the carriers, and the battle could turn in their favor. As the Japanese bombers continue their engagement with American fighters, the American pilots begin their dives. The Japanese pilots are preoccupied, too distracted by the air battle to notice the slow descent of the Dauntless bombers. The American pilots know this is their moment. They push their aircraft into their dive. The world around them narrows as the ground rushes up to meet them and their bombs begin to fall. From the cockpit of a Dauntless ensign, George H.W. Bush, his face grim but determined, watches as the Japanese fleet below him begins to materialize, large, imposing the unmistakable form of aircraft carriers sitting among their escorts. His heart pounds. The bomb bay doors are open and the target is locked. Below him, the Akagi looms, surrounded by its protective ring of destroyers. His target, his mission, his responsibility. For a moment, he hesitates, just a moment. The overwhelming pressure of the dive clouds his judgment, but he quickly pushes the doubt aside. His bomb is already on its way. The Akagi's fate is now sealed. The bomb hits its target with terrifying precision, exploding in a burst of flame and smoke. For a brief second, the world seems to hold its breath. The explosion rips into the deck of the Akagi, a fireball erupts and the ship shudders violently. In that instant, everything changes. The Akagi is not sunk yet, but it's been hit. The damage is severe, but it's not the end. At least not yet. But the first ripple of disaster has been cast. Above, the sky is still filled with chaos. Explosions, tracers, and the spiraling forms of planes plunging into the sea. The American pilots are relentless. They know the battle is on, and their hearts race as they prepare for another dive. The Japanese, still reeling from the sudden attack, struggle to regain their composure. Nagumo receives more reports. The Akagi has been hit. He can't believe it at first. His perfect plan, a plan that had been years in the making, is being torn apart before his very eyes. The other carriers, Kaga Soryu and Hiryu, are still intact, but the damage to the Akagi is severe. In the midst of the chaos, the remaining Japanese bombers continue their mission, still pushing forward with their strike on Midway. But there's a shift. The bombers are distracted, their formation broken. The air superiority they had once taken for granted is slipping away. The Japanese attack was supposed to be flawless, but the unexpected has arrived. And now, for the first time, the Japanese pilots feel the weight of uncertainty. June 4th, 1942, 6:45 a.m., the Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The battle is no longer a question of whether the Japanese will succeed. It is now a question of how much damage they will sustain before they can complete their mission. The first wave of American Dauntless bombers has struck the Akagi, the first explosion now rippling through the heart of Japan's mighty fleet. But even as the Akagi burns, the rest of the fleet continues to press forward, relentless and confident in their numbers. The plan, after all, was still solid. Admiral Nagumo stands on the bridge of the Akagi, his face grim. He watches the plume of smoke rising from his flagship. The damage is catastrophic, but not fatal, not yet. The ship is still afloat, and the mission still must be completed. The rest of his fleet is intact. The carriers, Kaga Soryu and Hiryu, are all still operational, their bombers now launching in response to the attack. There is still hope, but it is an illusion. Nagumo's calm is slipping, but he cannot afford to let his men see it. His orders are issued swiftly. Another wave of bombers will be sent to Midway to finish the job. He dismisses all thoughts of retreat. There is no room for failure. This is the way of war. Japan must win, no matter the cost. Yet beneath the calm exterior, the cracks are beginning to form. As the Japanese bombers begin their second strike, another troubling report arrives, this time from the Kaga. It, too, has been struck, though not as severely as the Akagi. The damage to the Kaga's flight deck is significant, but the carrier is still operational for now. But each report, each new piece of bad news chips away at Nagumo's earlier confidence. The sky above Midway is filled with the deafening roar of engines, but it is not the sound of victory. It is the sound of confusion, of escalation. The American planes are not retreating. They are diving once more, following the first wave of bombers. The Japanese pilots, caught in a fight that should never have happened, begin to panic. Their formations are broken. Their precision falters. They had been trained to strike without hesitation, to fly with precision and deadly focus. But now those skills are being tested like never before. Their bombers, those instruments of overwhelming force, are now flying into chaos. The American fighters are relentless, diving from the sky in precision strikes, picking off the attackers one by one. Amid the confusion, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Best, the leader of the American bombers from the Enterprise, watches as his squadron dives toward their target. His plane shakes violently as the air rips past. His focus is sharp. He's been in combat before, but this feels different. Every instinct in him tells him this is the moment. They have only one shot at this, and the Japanese fleet is exposed. As Best's squadron hits their dive-bombing altitude, the Japanese fleet below looks like a sitting target. The Soryu, Hiryu, and the still-burning Akagi are scattered across the sea, surrounded by destroyers and light cruisers. But as Best's bombers descend, another shift happens. The Japanese are beginning to respond with their own fighters, trying desperately to fend off the American bombers. Yet the Japanese fighters are too few, their focus divided. They cannot protect their own bombers, and their defensive response is too little, too late. The Soryu is the next to feel the sting of the American attack. Best's bombers release their payloads, and with terrifying accuracy, the bombs slam into the carrier's flight deck. The explosion is enormous. Flames erupt, sending black smoke spiraling high into the air. In the blink of an eye, one of Japan's finest carriers is crippled. On the bridge of the Soryu, Captain Kamio Mitsuo watches as the flames consume his ship. His crew scrambles, but it is clear that there is no hope. His ship is sinking. There is no question now Japan's strategic advantage is slipping away, and with it, their chances of success. The Japanese response continues to escalate. More planes are launched from the remaining carriers. The skies above Midway are filled with the sounds of combat, but they are no longer confident sounds. There is an air of desperation now. Japan's once dominant fleet is fraying at the edges, and every time an American bomb drops, another piece of Japan's naval supremacy is ripped away. Meanwhile, aboard the Enterprise, Ensign George H.W. Bush watches as the Soryu continues to burn. His heart races, but he does not hesitate. His squadron continues to dive, each pilot laser-focused on their mission. He knows this is no longer about skill, it is about survival. The Japanese fleet, once invincible, is showing cracks. The attack that was supposed to be a flawless, devastating blow is unraveling before everyone's eyes. Admiral Nagumo, still aboard the Akagi, receives the report about the Soryu. It is now sinking. His mind races as he processes the loss. 2 carriers, 2 of Japan's most powerful ships, are now gone. This was never part of the plan. The ripple effect of these losses is spreading through the fleet. Morale is crumbling. The sense of invincibility that had once defined the Imperial Japanese Navy is slipping into something else, fear. For the first time since the battle began, Nagumo starts to entertain a thought he never considered before: retreat. But it is too late. There is no room for retreat. He can only fight on and hope for a miracle. The tide has turned. The American pilots, relentless and focused, have taken the initiative. They now control the skies above Midway, and with each bomb they drop, the Japanese fleet becomes less and less capable of fighting back. June 4th, 1942, 7 a.m., the Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The battle now feels like it has shifted irreversibly. The Japanese fleet, once confident and poised to strike a decisive blow against the Americans, is now a swirling mass of confusion. The sky above Midway, which had once seemed to favor Japan's aircraft, is now alive, with the roaring engines of American bombers diving through the smoke and the chaos leaving destruction in their wake. The Akagi Kaga and Soryu, 3 of Japan's most powerful carriers, are either burning or sinking, and Japan's naval strength has been severely crippled. On the bridge of the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo watches the devastation unfold. He had always believed in the power of his fleet, in the technological superiority of the Japanese Navy. But now that belief is unraveling before his eyes. The reports coming in are filled with loss and damage. The Akagi is burning, the Soryu is sinking, and the Kaga is not far behind. Even the Hiryu, the last carrier still in action, is now under heavy attack. Nagumo feels the weight of his decisions pressing down on him, but he can't afford to show it. His voice remains steady as he gives orders to continue the fight, to press on, despite the mounting losses. His eyes flicker briefly toward the map in front of him. He can see the American fleet spread out around Midway, but they are too far to engage. The Japanese bombers are still in the air, and their strikes on Midway are still the priority. But each new report, each wave of bombs falling on his ships, is a reminder that the battle is slipping away from Japan. Aboard the Enterprise, Ensign George H.W. Bush is reloading his plane after his first successful dive. His heart still pounds in his chest, but he can't afford to stop. The adrenaline is driving him forward, his mind focused on the mission, blocks out everything else: the heat of the sun, the swirling air, the sound of explosions around him. He knows that each bomb he drops has the potential to change the course of the battle. The mission, however, has become something else now. It is no longer just about success. It is about survival. The bombers from the Enterprise and Hornet continue to rain down on the remaining Japanese carriers, and now the tide has turned. The Hiryu, still a formidable force, is hit. The bombers come in fast, their sights set on the carrier's vulnerable flight deck. The explosion that follows is deafening. For a moment, it's unclear whether the ship will stay afloat, but the damage is severe. The Hiryu is on fire, listing to one side, the crew scrambling to contain the damage, but it's too much. The once mighty carrier is no longer capable of continuing the fight. The Japanese, who had once mocked the Americans' dive bombing as unreliable and inaccurate, now find themselves victims of the very method they had scorned. The American dive bombers have proven their worth in the skies above Midway. Every bomb that falls is a testament to their precision, to the strategy they had perfected. Japan's pride has been shattered. What they thought impossible has been made real. The American dive bombers, with their terrifying accuracy, have shown the true power of a weapon that the Japanese once dismissed. But the destruction is far from over. The Japanese pilots, those who still remain in the air, now realize the full scope of the disaster. Their carriers, the backbone of their offensive power, are falling one by one. The skies, once their domain, are now filled with the smoke of burning ships and the shrieks of American bombers. The weight of Japan's underestimation of the Americans, of their belief that they could never match the might of the Imperial Navy, has come crashing down on them. And yet, despite the mounting losses, Nagumo refuses to give in. He still holds on to the hope that victory is possible, that the final blow to Midway will turn the tide. His messages to the remaining fleet are filled with the same cold determination, urging them to press on. But in the pit of his stomach, he knows it's too late. His carriers are gone, his fleet is crippled, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. As the bombs fall, the realization begins to spread among the remaining Japanese pilots. Some of them are already planning escape routes, knowing that the battle is lost. Others try to make one final desperate attack on the American ships. But the effort is futile. The Americans have already gained the upper hand. Their carriers are still operational, their bombers still flying. The Japanese, once so confident in their superiority, are now struggling to stay afloat. The turning point of the battle has arrived, though no one aboard the Akagi is ready to admit it yet. There is no longer any question of a Japanese victory. The ships, the bombers, the men, everything they had relied upon has been shattered in a matter of hours. The Japanese attack, once filled with the promise of success, has become an unmitigated disaster. On Midway, the island's defenders watch as the smoke rises from the Japanese fleet. Their relief is palpable, but they do not yet understand the full scope of what has occurred. The battle is far from over. But the Americans are no longer simply fighting for survival. They are fighting for a future where Japan's dominance in the Pacific has been shattered. In the sky above the remains of the Japanese fleet, Ensign Bush feels the weight of the moment settle on him. The mission is not over, but the tide has turned. The American pilots, the ones who had been mocked for their reliance on dive bombing, have proven themselves. The Japanese attack is now in ruins, and with it, their hope of victory. June 4th, 1942. 7:30 a.m., the Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The battle now feels like an unstoppable cascade of events spiraling toward an inevitable conclusion. The once proud Japanese fleet spread across the vast Pacific expanse is now burning, sinking, and disintegrating before the eyes of its commanders. The four carriers, the heart of Japan's naval power, are either crippled or completely destroyed. The situation is dire, and yet on the bridge of the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo still refuses to admit defeat. As Nagumo watches the smoke rise from his flagship and the Kaga, his mind struggles to hold on to the flickering remnants of hope. His crew is overwhelmed, the once efficient officers and sailors now stumbling through the chaos, their faces etched with disbelief. The reports of the damage are no longer just bad, they are catastrophic. The Akagi's flight deck is wrecked, fires spreading uncontrollably below decks. The Soryu is sinking, and the Kaga is already lost. The Hiryu, the final carrier, is badly damaged and in danger of succumbing to the same fate. Yet in this chaos, there is still a glimmer of something that resembles defiance, a refusal to believe that defeat is imminent. Nagumo orders that all remaining aircraft continue their assault on Midway despite the grave situation. His thinking is muddled by desperation. The fleet must still destroy Midway as planned, or the entire operation will have been a waste. He can't bring himself to give the order to retreat, even though the losses are piling up. The mission must go on. Japan's honor demands it. The sailors on the Akagi feel the heat of the fire below, but their hands are still steady, their movements still precise as they continue to operate the ship, trying desperately to keep it afloat. The fight is no longer about strategy, it's about survival. Every man aboard is now locked in a battle, not just with the Americans, but with the rising tide of realization that their once unstoppable fleet is no more. Meanwhile, the American pilots, some still airborne, are unaware of the full extent of the Japanese fleet's disintegration. Their mission was simple: destroy the carriers. But now, with 3 carriers already incapacitated, the sky has shifted in their favor. For the first time in the battle, the Americans can afford to be more cautious. The Hiryu, however, still presents a threat, and its last remaining bombers are preparing for one final strike on the American fleet. But the Japanese pilots are now fully aware of the chaos surrounding them. Their strikes are less coordinated, less precise. There is no longer a unified strategy, only scattered desperation. The Hiryu, its flight deck damaged, and its crew scrambling to contain fires, sends out a final wave of bombers toward the Yorktown. But the bombers are delayed their approach, compromised by the damage sustained by the carrier. The Hiryu, still trying to fight back, is less coordinated, less organized than the Japanese pilots were used to. The chaos is palpable. Captain Frank J. Fletcher, commanding officer aboard the Yorktown, is watching with growing anxiety as the report comes in. His ship is in danger. The Yorktown is still intact, but the Japanese are still launching attacks. There's no way of knowing how long the carrier will remain operational, with fires beginning to spread below decks and the enemy closing in. Yet, Fletcher's mind remains calm as his ship's defenses fight back against the incoming bombers. The crew has been trained for this. The response is immediate. Anti-aircraft guns rattle and the sounds of explosions reverberate across the water. But the knowledge that the battle is far from won remains heavy. For Ensign George H.W. Bush, still in the skies above the Pacific, the confusion of the battle is thick. His bombers, fresh from their dive, have returned to base, but there's no time for rest. The sky is a mess of swirling aircraft, the air filled with tracer rounds and enemy planes trying desperately to strike back. Bush's squadron, having dealt a devastating blow to the Soryu, is still engaged in the aerial battle, providing support for the remaining American bombers as they continue to clear the skies. They cannot afford to let up. This is still war. The full victory is not yet secured, and every new dive from the remaining Japanese bombers feels like the final attempt to salvage the battle. Above, the sky is filled with the chaotic sounds of aerial combat. The Japanese bombers weaving through fire and explosions as they attempt to strike back at the American carriers. The American pilots, who had once feared the Japanese precision and power, are now engaged in a fierce counterattack. The tide has turned, but the struggle continues. For the Japanese pilots, the moment of realization has come. There is no escape now. They have lost their carriers. They have lost their advantage. Their hope is gone, crushed under the weight of the American counteroffensive. The pilots still in the air are forced to make impossible choices. Some try to return to their remaining carriers, knowing that it's a futile attempt, while others abandon their aircraft, forced to land in the ocean or bail out. Back aboard, the Akagi Nagumo is still issuing orders, still trying to hold on to the remnants of his mission. But there is no longer any coherent strategy. The Japanese fleet is disintegrating under the weight of American precision and sheer determination. The aircraft are fewer now, their attacks scattered. Japan's once mighty naval air force is now reduced to a handful of desperate men trying to salvage something from the ruins. The American pilots, exhausted but resolute, circle the remains of the Japanese fleet, picking off the last targets with grim efficiency. The Hiryu's remaining bombers, despite their desperate efforts, are wiped from the sky. The Japanese fleet is now in complete disarray. What had seemed an unstoppable force just hours ago is now a fleet of burning wrecks struggling to stay afloat. The shock is evident on both sides. The Japanese fleet's near-total destruction in the face of the American counterattack is a moment no one had anticipated. The consequences are clear. The Japanese have lost the battle, and with it, any hope of maintaining dominance in the Pacific. The shock waves of the battle will be felt for years to come, as Japan's naval supremacy is forever shattered. June 4, 1942. 8 a.m. The Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The moment of clarity has arrived for the Japanese fleet, but it is not the victory they had once anticipated. The original plan, meticulously crafted and executed with the precision of a well-oiled machine, has collapsed in the face of relentless American counterattacks. The carriers that were meant to bring Japan its long-sought dominance in the Pacific are now burning wrecks. The initial arrogance that had fueled the operation is now replaced by a slow-reaping realization of its failure. There is no escape from the truth. Japan's strategy has been torn apart in a matter of hours. Admiral Nagumo stands on the bridge of the Akagi, staring out across the sea. The fires on his ship still rage, consuming parts of the flight deck. The Soryu is already lost, sinking beneath the waves. The Kaga is a wreck, its charred remains drifting in the water. The Hiryu, still intact for the moment, is now crippled with no way to defend itself. The attack on Midway, once the primary objective, now seems insignificant compared to the staggering losses Japan has incurred. Nagumo's mind races, but there is no plan left to salvage. He had always believed in the superiority of Japan's navy, in the perfect execution of their tactics. The flawless attack on Pearl Harbor had instilled confidence, but now, in the midst of the chaos, he understands that his forces are utterly beaten. His earlier confidence, once so unshakable, has completely evaporated. There is no question now Japan's naval power has been decimated, and the tide of war in the Pacific has shifted irrevocably. The order to retreat is inevitable, though it is not given yet. There is no time to mourn the loss of so many ships' pilots and sailors. The only thing left to do is save whatever is left of the fleet. Nagumo contacts the remaining ships of the Japanese fleet, giving orders to disengage and head back towards safer waters. But the damage is done. The Japanese Navy is no longer a force to be reckoned with. The battle for Midway, once seen as a foregone conclusion, is over. On the American side, the aftermath of the attack is equally overwhelming, though it is a different kind of weight. The skies above the Pacific are now clear of enemy aircraft. The Enterprise Yorktown and Hornet have survived the worst, and their planes, though battered and exhausted, are still in the air. The battle has not yet officially ended, but the finality of Japan's defeat is unmistakable. American bombers continue to circle the wrecks of the Japanese fleet, picking off any remaining targets. Ensign George H.W. Bush. His aircraft, now heavily damaged, but still operational, scans the sky as he returns to base. The air around him is quieter now, no longer filled with the roar of enemy aircraft. There is a moment of stunned silence among the American pilots. They had gone into the battle knowing the stakes, knowing the risks, but no one had anticipated the scale of the victory. The Japanese fleet, once feared and revered, is now a shattered remnant. It is hard to believe even after everything that has transpired, but the proof is in the destruction below. As Bush's squadron touches down on the Enterprise, he is struck by the sense of finality in the air. The battle is over, and the cost has been tremendous. Many of the pilots, himself included, have lost comrades. But the victory is undeniable. Midway, once thought to be the site of Japan's triumph, has now become the place where their naval dominance was shattered. The course of the war in the Pacific has been altered, and the American fleet, though still battered, has proven itself capable of striking a decisive blow. Back aboard the Akagi, the mood has shifted from defiance to despair. The ship, once the pride of Japan's naval fleet, is now a symbol of the failure of the entire operation. The sailors below decks are exhausted, their faces streaked with smoke and sweat, as they attempt to contain the fires that still rage. But it is clear to all that the damage is too great. The Akagi is beyond saving. The loss of the ship represents more than just the destruction of a carrier. It is the death knell of Japan's hope to dominate the Pacific. The decision to retreat comes too late. Even if the remaining ships manage to escape the battle, they cannot undo the damage that has already been done. Japan's fleet is no longer capable of sustaining the war at the same scale. The remaining aircraft, now few in number and scattered, are unable to mount any meaningful counterattack. What had once seemed like a flawless offensive has turned into a debacle that no one could have foreseen. For the Japanese, the battle at Midway is the beginning of the end. Their carriers are destroyed, their pride shattered, and their strategy in ruins. The empire that had once seemed invincible is now faced with the harsh reality of its limitations. There will be no more swift victories. The American Navy, though still small in comparison, has proven itself to be a formidable adversary. Japan's naval superiority has been torn apart, and the balance of power in the Pacific has shifted. Admiral Nagumo, now faced with the remnants of his once proud fleet, can only give the order to retreat. But it is too late. The momentum of the war has shifted. The loss of Midway and the destruction of Japan's carriers will be a turning point from which there will be no return. The full cost of the battle is clear now. Japan's plan has collapsed. It is no longer just about a failed operation. It is about the loss of a navy. The loss of confidence and the loss of a future that had once seemed so certain. The consequences of the day's events will echo across the Pacific for years to come. June 4th, 1942. 9 a.m. The Pacific Ocean north of Midway Atoll. The reality is now undeniable. The Japanese fleet, once the epitome of naval superiority, has been shattered beyond repair. The Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, all symbols of Japan's naval might, are either burning, sinking, or already lost. The pride of Japan's carrier fleet, the very core of their strategy, is gone, and with it, their hope of a swift victory in the Pacific. Yet even in the face of this catastrophic failure, the remnants of the Japanese fleet still cling to the hope of regaining some semblance of control over the battle. Admiral Nagumo's orders to retreat come far too late. The once unified Japanese fleet is now scattered across the vast expanse of the Pacific, struggling to maintain any semblance of coordination. The remaining ships, including the damaged Hiryu and the scattered support vessels, are trying to retreat to safer waters, but the damage has been done. The American fleet, with its carriers still intact and its bombers still operational, now controls the skies above Midway and the surrounding waters. On the Akagi, the mood is somber. The sailors who were once so sure of their mission now move with a grim determination to salvage what little they can. Fire crews continue to battle the blazes that consume the ship, but the ship is already beyond saving. There is no more hope for the Akagi. It is simply a matter of how much longer it can hold out before it succumbs to the flames. The sailors, their faces blackened with soot, work tirelessly, not for victory, but for survival. The ship that was once a symbol of Japan's invincibility is now a wreck, its crew clinging to the fading hope of escape. In the air, the Japanese pilots who remain in the sky are flying with a sense of desperation. Their mission has shifted from one of triumph to one of damage control. With their carriers destroyed, their mission now is simply to make sure the Americans do not score any further victories. But their resolve is faltering. The loss of their comrades, the destruction of their ships, and the overwhelming power of the American bombers have shattered the unity that once defined their attacks. Some of the pilots, realizing the futility of continuing the battle, begin to disengage, abandoning their planes or attempting to flee. The coordinated attacks that once made them a formidable force are now scattered, each pilot left to make their own decision. For the remaining pilots, the mental strain is immense. Their confidence has been shattered, their mission has failed, and the realization that they have been outmatched is sinking in. The precision and organization that had been the hallmark of Japanese dive bombing now seems like a distant memory. The chaos of the battlefield has turned their once efficient strategy into a frantic scramble for survival. Meanwhile, the American pilots, though exhausted from their earlier successes, are not yet ready to relax. The battle for Midway is not yet fully won. There are still enemy planes in the sky, and the threat of a final strike from the remaining Japanese bombers is still real. But the mood among the American pilots is one of growing confidence. The Akagi, Kaga and Soryu have been destroyed, and the Hiryu is in its final moments. The overwhelming sense of shock and disbelief from earlier is giving way to a quiet, focused determination. On the Enterprise, Ensign George H.W. Bush is still in the air, circling above the remnants of the Japanese fleet. His mind is sharp, but the weight of the victory has not yet fully settled. The bombs he dropped, the planes he fought against, the carriers, now burning beneath him, it all feels like a dream. But the reality is clear. Japan has lost. The balance of power in the Pacific has shifted, and the American Navy has proven itself capable of taking on the might of Japan's carrier fleet. But even as the Americans regroup and prepare for the final assault, they know that the battle is far from over. Midway has been secured, but the Japanese fleet still poses a threat. The remaining ships are limping away, trying to regroup, and the possibility of further attacks is still very real. But with every passing minute, the reality of Japan's defeat becomes more apparent. The Pacific is no longer a battleground that Japan can dominate with ease. The battle for the Pacific has just begun, but the Japanese Navy has already suffered a devastating blow. Back aboard the Akagi, the situation grows more dire by the minute. The ship is sinking, its decks shattered, and its crew now fighting only to stay alive. Nagumo, unable to prevent the collapse of his fleet, issues his final orders: evacuate the ship, abandon what remains. There will be no more fighting. The mission is over. The dream of a Japanese-dominated Pacific is no more. The sailors, weary and devastated, know that this is the end. The Akagi's fate is sealed. As the flames continue to consume the ship, the final remnants of Japan's naval strength slip away into the Pacific. There is nothing more to be done. The remaining fleet, now fragmented and demoralized, begins its retreat, but the damage has already been done. For the Americans, the battle has not only been won, it has been decisively won. Midway is secure, Japan's carriers have been destroyed, and the Pacific balance of power has shifted. The defeat of the Japanese fleet marks the beginning of the end of Japan's dominance in the Pacific. The cost has been high, but the victory is complete. As the survivors of the Akagi abandon their ship and head into the open sea, they know that the battle for the Pacific is not over. But the Japanese fleet, once the most powerful in the world, has been broken, and in the midst of the wreckage, the Americans begin to realize that they have just achieved the unthinkable. June 4th, 1942. 10 a.m., the Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The smoke rises from the remains of the Japanese fleet, hanging over the Pacific like a grim reminder of what was lost. The sight of the burning, sinking ships, the once proud Akagi, Kagasoryu, and Hiryu, is a silent testimony to the unthinkable. Japan's naval supremacy, which had seemed so invincible just hours before, has crumbled. The Pacific, once a vast expanse of unchallenged Japanese power, has now become a battlefield in which America has not only fought for survival, but has now emerged as a dominant force. Above the burning waters, the American bombers continue their patrols. Ensign George H.W. Bush, still in the air and circling above the wreckage, feels the weight of the moment settle in. The battle has shifted, the tide has turned, and the outcome is clear. Japan's fleet has been devastated beyond repair. But even in victory, there is no sense of triumph, only exhaustion and the haunting awareness of the cost. The loss of so many men, so many comrades, will weigh on the survivors long after the battle ends. Yet amid the silence, there is also a deep, unspoken sense of realization. Midway has marked the turning point of the war in the Pacific. Japan's ambitions have been shattered in a way that no one could have predicted. The Japanese Navy, once thought to be untouchable, is now a broken force, and the balance of power in the Pacific is forever changed. Aboard the Enterprise, Commander Fletcher watches as his pilots return, their faces etched with fatigue and disbelief. The battle is over, but the true magnitude of the victory has not yet settled in. For many, there will be no victory dance, no celebration. The stakes were too high, and the cost was too steep. But as the American pilots land and regroup, they can finally acknowledge the truth. Japan, in one decisive stroke, has lost its dominance. The dream of an empire stretching across the Pacific is no more. Midway is a graveyard of Japanese ambition. On the Akagi, the situation has reached its final moments. Admiral Nagumo, having watched as his fleet disintegrated, stands at the helm of the ship now consumed by flames. The Akagi is sinking, and the final blow to Japan's strategic vision has been dealt. Nagumo, once so confident in his plan, now stands in the midst of destruction, knowing that there is no coming back from this. His fleet, his aircraft, his carriers, everything has been lost. The dream of an unstoppable Imperial Navy has been shattered. The recognition of defeat is too much to bear. There is no glory in this final retreat, no honor in this crushing loss. The only remaining question is how much longer the Akagi can hold out before it is swallowed by the sea. The sailors aboard the Akagi, having long since abandoned any hope of salvaging the ship, now struggle to survive. Many are already in the water trying to escape the burning wreckage. The others, still clinging to life, have little chance of escaping the fate that awaits them. As the flames spread, and the ship continues to list the last vestiges of the once proud ship sink beneath the waves, its stern the last part to disappear from view. There is no fanfare, no heroic last stand. The Akagi, and with it Japan's naval supremacy, disappears into the depths of the Pacific. Across the ocean at Midway, the American forces begin to regroup. The battle has ended, but the realization of what has transpired still feels unreal. The island, which had been on the brink of destruction, is now a symbol of American resilience. The Japanese fleet, the core of Japan's Pacific strategy, has been obliterated. The Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet still float proudly on the ocean, their crews battered but resolute. The battle is over, but the realization of victory is tempered by the understanding of what it has cost. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, overseeing the American forces, surveys the damage and the aftermath. He knows this battle will go down in history, but he also knows that the cost has been high. The victory at Midway is a turning point, but it is also the beginning of a long road. The Pacific War is far from over, but Japan has suffered a blow from which it cannot recover. Midway is more than just a battle, it is a statement. A statement that the United States, once caught off guard at Pearl Harbor, has now become a force to be reckoned with. The full scope of Japan's defeat becomes clearer with each passing hour. The Japanese Navy has lost 4 carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and countless pilots. The loss of these vessels, the backbone of their naval power, is a wound from which Japan will never fully recover. The once imposing fleet that had swept across the Pacific is now scattered, broken, and retreating. The strategic shift is undeniable. Japan's path to victory in the Pacific has been irrevocably derailed. In the sky above the wreckage, Bush's mind drifts back to the men he fought with, the ones who had fallen. Their faces, their names will stay with him forever. The victory is not just a victory for America, it is a victory for the men who fought for it, and a tribute to the countless souls who will never return home. The war is not over, but Midway has proven that in this conflict, anything is possible. The moment of realization, the awareness that this battle has changed the course of history, settles over the Americans like a heavy fog. Victory has been achieved, but the true impact of what has happened will take time to fully understand. The Pacific War has shifted in their favor, and from this moment on, the Japanese will never be the same. June 5, 1942. 12 p.m. The Pacific Ocean, north of Midway Atoll. The battle has been won, but its echoes ripple far beyond the sunlit waters of Midway. The American Navy has achieved a staggering, unprecedented victory, one that will forever alter the course of the Pacific War. Japan's naval power, the force that had swept across the Pacific with ruthless efficiency just months earlier, has been shattered. The carriers, once the crown jewels of the Imperial Navy, are now wrecks, and with them, Japan's ability to project power across the vast ocean has been crippled. The very foundation of Japan's strategy, built on the strength of its fleet and the precision of its naval air force, has crumbled in a matter of hours. On Midway Atoll, the island that had been the target of Japan's wrath, the dust is beginning to settle. The fires have mostly been put out, and the island's defenders, though shaken and battered, stand victorious. The American forces, once unsure of their place in the war, have now secured their first major victory in the Pacific, and the impact of this success will reverberate across the world. The men who fought on Midway have not only saved the island, they have altered the fate of nations. For the survivors of the Akagi Kaga Soryu and Hiryu, the aftermath is a grim one. Japan's carriers, their pride and hope for a swift and decisive victory, are now at the bottom of the Pacific. The survivors are left to drift, either clinging to life in the open ocean or making their way back to Japan, where they will return as men who failed in their most critical mission. The arrogance that had defined their naval strategy, the belief that their superiority was unquestionable, now stands exposed as nothing more than a fatal miscalculation. Japan's leadership, once confident in the certainty of victory, is now forced to confront the consequences of their decisions. Admiral Nagumo, having watched the destruction of his fleet, is left with little more than the bitter knowledge that Japan's strategic plans have collapsed. His initial arrogance, which had led to the underestimation of American capabilities, has given way to the grim reality of defeat. The fleet he commanded is no more. The men he once led are either dead or stranded, and his failure at Midway will follow him for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, in the United States, the full scale of the victory begins to sink in. The Navy's success at Midway will be hailed as one of the most remarkable military achievements in modern history. The loss of 4 Japanese carriers will be a devastating blow to Japan, one from which they will never fully recover. The American public, having suffered in the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor, will see Midway as the turning point in the Pacific War. But for the men who fought and died in the skies above the atoll, the victory is not so simple. The cost of war has left its scars. Ensign George H.W. Bush, having played his part in the battle, returns to the Enterprise, the ship that had carried him through the skies above Midway. His thoughts are with the men who didn't come back. The victory, though significant, is tinged with the weight of loss. The faces of his fallen comrades, the pilots who made the ultimate sacrifice, will stay with him forever. In the midst of the celebration that will follow, Bush will remember that this victory was bought with the lives of many, and that the war is far from over. The lesson of Midway for Japan comes too late. The loss of their carriers represents more than just the destruction of ships. It is the collapse of Japan's strategy for dominance in the Pacific. The belief in the invincibility of their naval power, which had driven them to expand across the Pacific, has been shattered. With Midway, the United States has shown the world that Japan is not infallible, that their military might can be matched and defeated. The Japanese Navy, once the most feared in the world, will now spend the rest of the war in retreat, its momentum broken. The turning point in the Pacific has arrived, but for Japan it is too late to reverse the course of history. For the United States, Midway marks the beginning of a new phase in the Pacific War. The victory has secured the American position in the Pacific, but the cost of the conflict is clear. The Navy has proved its resilience, but it has also paid a heavy price. The war is not over, and Japan will not surrender easily. The American forces, emboldened by their success at Midway, now know that they can win in the Pacific. But they also know that the war will continue, that more battles, more bloodshed, and more sacrifices will follow. The victory at Midway does not mark the end of the war, but it is the moment when the future of the Pacific War was sealed. Japan's dream of an empire stretching across the Pacific was shattered on that island as its fleet sank beneath the waves. The loss of Midway and the destruction of the Japanese carriers will go down in history as one of the most decisive and devastating defeats in military history. And so, as the Akagi Kaga Soryu and Hiryu disappear beneath the waves, so too does Japan's hope of a quick victory in the Pacific. The price of overconfidence, the cost of underestimating the enemy, has been paid in full. The war, though far from over, will never be the same again. Midway, once seen as a strategic opportunity for Japan, has instead become the tomb of their ambitions, a lesson learned too late for the men who fell, and too late for the empire that thought it could conquer the Pacific.